Hey everybody, we are here with conversation number 55. I think, as you're watching this, there's only really one thing that we're going to be focusing on, talking about for a while right now, at least in the near future, and that is the Charlie Kirk assassination, the Charlie Kirk killing, whatever you want to say. So I guess, Josiah, let me just start out. Like, who was Charlie Kirk? What would you tell the listeners, the viewers?
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Kirk was a pundit, influencer, activist, conservative, radio host, all of the above. Young kid. It's kind of amazing. He was only 31. If you think about, mm, he was a name back during Trump's first run for the presidency in 2015, 2016, when he would have been 20 years old, right? uh, Founded Turning Point USA, very important college oriented conservative organization, uh, which I think is generally agreed to have been very successful, both in kind of increasing the prevalence of conservative and right wing ideas and viewpoints on college campuses, and then also just as a general Republican get out the vote backbone type of thing. Uh, and I have to say, I was not hugely like I knew about Charlie Kirk or whatever, but I wasn't a Charlie Kirk super fan. I didn't have anything against him, but I think I had maybe listened to his radio show a couple of times, and maybe I had seen a couple of television appearances, other things like that, as you do. But that was about it. Um, we did have, a mutual friend of ours, Blake Neff, is one of his producers. So I knew about that. But since his death, I will say, his content has kind of been everywhere on social media, other thing like little clips. Some of them from his radio show or TV appearances, but a lot of them just from one thing that he apparently did and pioneered. He's not the only one who does this, but he would go to college campuses and he would kind of set up a booth with a microphone and just accept all comers. Like people would come up and argue with him about whatever, and they would have back and forths. And I was looking at all these clips. I was pretty impressed, I have to say. With a lot of them, some of them were posted intending to be, positive, so they could be like highlights, I guess. But other people have been posting negative clips or, incidents where he said something bad or whatnot. And for the most part, even those clips, I have to say, viewed in context, he seems to come off pretty well. For example, one clip that a lot of people have been sharing because of the seeming irony, I guess, is there was occasion where apparently he said that some amount of gun deaths are worth it to preserve the Second Amendment or whatever, right? Which taken in isolation sounds pretty heartless, but if you look at the actual clip, I think it's pretty thoughtful in that there are lots of just liberty in general, in all sorts of different ways, involves trade-offs and sacrifices, including the risk to human life. I think he might have used the example of cars where we have 40,000, deaths a year. 40,000 people die from vehicles, but if you were to just say no one could use cars, that would be an enormous cost. We kind of consider that to be worth it. There are a lot of other things like that. So, whatever your view on the Second Amendment, I think if you look into that, I don't think you can, it doesn't come across to me as, heartless or stupid or whatnot. You could agree or disagree, but a lot of the stuff was like that. So Um, that's I guess that's kind of Charlie Kirk in a nutshell. I never met the guy, you know, um, but it. I mean, it's a he loomed kind of large in the conservative movement, especially I guess in young people, and to some extent, I don't even think that we realized how big until he was killed, you know, and all sorts of people, you know, kind of came out of the woodwork in terms of like the role that he had played or whatever. So, um, I mean, who knows? You know, he's only 31, so he could have been a major player over the next, you know, 50 years, maybe 40, 50 years. So that's, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
what
So
can
let
you say?
me. So I was thinking. So Charlie Kirk has been part of, like you, Josiah. I follow politics kind of casually. Somewhat. And he's been just part of my Twitter timeline, kind of part of the zeitgeist for a long time. As you said, he has been involved. I mean, he's been involved. He was on Fox Business News, I think, when he was 17,
Right.
protesting some school thing. I think Turning Point, he started when he was 18. So he is a college dropout. He's a community college dropout. He dropped out after a term. I remember when he was about 20, I believe he was like 19 or 20, he was going to colleges. He had started Turning Point USA, and I remember being really confused because this is weird. This guy dropped out of community college, and he's at colleges debating kids. And it was like a talking point where he would, people would ask him like, "You didn't even go to college," And he's like,
Right.
"Well, colleges are where the future is being created and shaped. These are the future generations of leaders and all this." Totally correct, right? So I mean, he had his heart on, or he had his his finger on the pulse of something there,
Right.
and his early stuff. I'm not gonna say it's cringe. It was just pretty basic bitch conservatism. It was basically like, okay, what if Rush Limbaugh was 20? You
Mm.
know,
Right.
um, so nothing super shocking, socially conservative, biblically based worldviews, an evangelical Protestant, almost a throwback in some ways to the social conservatives that I remembered from my youth in the 1990s.
Yeah.
Not someone like J.D. Vance, who's a Catholic convert and that sort of thing. So yeah,
Right.
he's from Chicago. He's a northern, Midwestern evangelical Protestant. Just that's a
Mhm.
certain type of person that was around in the late 20th century. That was a big deal. Pat Robertson won the Iowa primary. I think it was '88.
Right.
So
Yes. Yes.
that's a whole faction on the right in the Republican Party, and he was representing those people. And I remember there was some like meme. It was like 2016, and it was kind of funny because it was just like it was a picture of him with his big head. He's just like, God is real, Reagan is good. You know what I'm saying? Like it was just
Right.
like, I mean, they're not. I'm not gonna say they're vapid. They have content, but they're just kind of banal slogans. And he was a sloganeer, is the
Yeah.
way I perceived him. And this was when he was about 20. And you know what? Like, what do we believe when we were 20? So like to be
Right.
fair to him,
Right.
we kind of like caught him at an intellectually immature point. And he was like a community college dropout. He's not like he wasn't clearly initially the most academically oriented person. Um, Maybe he became more. And it seems like he's evolved and changed. So when we're talking about Charlie Kirk, we are talking about someone whose almost whole actually not almost, literally his whole adult life was in the public eye,
Right.
and he was evolving in various ways. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. And his initial role was as kind of like part of these youth brigades, like TPUSA kind of co-opted Young Americans for Freedoms. Kind of updated it. It was like an updated youth-driven version of these campus Republican outfits, and it was less intellectual and tweety, kind of is what I think Ross Douthat said in his column recently. Our friend Ross, uh,
Mhm.
and it was more confrontational. It was kind of like a debate me bro attitude, and he
Right.
brought his own personality and his own debate me bro, attitude. And again, like I didn't pay attention to him that closely. I saw some of his stuff. He wasn't. I in fundamental ways, his politics wasn't really that different from Ben Shapiro's early on, especially. He was just a little bit. He spoke a little, slower, and like I mean, Ben Shapiro is just he's an extremely bright guy. Okay,
Right.
I'm not saying Charlie Kirk wasn't extremely bright, but it's like Charlie Kirk, like when he was 20, was not Ben Shapiro, and Ben Shapiro was 20. Charlie Kirk evolved, and I'll talk a little bit about that, I think, but like he did evolve and become more intellectual from what everything that I've heard, from what Blake has told me, and from what I've heard. I will also say, I've been in talks with Blake since last winter to come on to Charlie's show and do a show about DNA, going over
Right.
Charlie's results and stuff like that. That's not going to happen, obviously.
Yeah.
At least with Charlie's results, who knows? But the point is, he was interested in a variety of things. He was interested in reading and like papers. Our friend Cremu, who was on his show,
Right.
said that Charlie like asked him for papers and stuff all the time. So
Yeah.
that's the whole thing. That's like jumping forward to the future, but I'm just saying, like, for I think a lot of our viewers, a lot of our listeners, are pretty familiar with conservatism. For those who aren't, I want to make it clear about like what kind of person he was, what he came out of. Also, some people are saying that he was very, very.
Uh, you may have. I'm not hearing you anymore, Rajiv. Did you?
So, um, you know, in terms of Kirk and his evolution, he changed a lot. But I think if you watch his videos, I do want to emphasize this. Uh, he can be upset and annoyed, but it's not like he's not like a shock jock. He can be very winsome a lot of the times, and he is an evangelical Christian, and not all evangelical Christians, behave in a Christ-like way.
Right.
Um, but you can see when you're watching him, uh, he's trying his best, and when he goes into these places where people disagree with him a lot, he's mocked constantly.
Yeah.
And I think we know there's a certain type of preacher that goes into college campuses and they do fire and brimstone and they're mocked.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
wasn't doing fire and brimstone. He was just expressing his own views, which were like socially conservative views, evangelical Protestant views. He had the standard conservative views on for a while at least. Like initially, like again, he was basic boomer conservatism on foreign policy and economics. I don't think that would come in for as much mockery. It was more the social views.
Yeah.
Also, he really, really got on my radar during what was called the Groyper Wars, which happened in 2019. And basically, not Ben Shapiro was also targeted during this period. So Nick Fuentes and you guys can Google Nick Fuentes. I don't want to talk about Nick Fuentes, but his followers, was anti-Semitic, white nationalist, just extreme followers, were basically showing up at Charlie Kirk events and trolling or being very aggressive. And Charlie Kirk was there. I forget the guy's name now. You can look it up, but he was touring with a black gay conservative. Okay,
Hmm.
and so the Groypers would just basically be like, they would just say, I'm not going to say what they would say, but
Yeah.
they
Some
would say
sort of.
like vulgar things about
Yeah.
homosexuality, and
Right.
like Charlie Kirk's face was just like, what the fuck, you know what I'm saying? It's like you know what I'm trying to say? It's just like gross. Like what is wrong with you, And you could tell
Yeah.
that they were just like kind of taken aback. But that was actually when I saw Charlie Kirk be like when he was getting punched from the right. That was when I saw he was kind of like losing his cool because I think, okay, this is not what he was. This is initially not what he was expecting. And like, what do you say to someone that's just like, you don't stand up for white people and you're controlled by the Jews? It's like, okay,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
he could say, well, Jesus Christ is a Jew. I think he would say things like that,
Yeah.
And they're
Yes.
like, well, I'm a Catholic and I believe that like only like Christians should be able to vote. I just like stuff that is kind of off the reservation and weird. He was definitely like perturbed by that. He was very rarely perturbed by liberals because he was expecting their arguments. Now, I don't think that all of his arguments were. I didn't agree that they were necessarily persuasive, but they were often cogent and coherent. Like they had a structure. And so I think the way that people think that, oh, Charlie Kirk is he was not necessarily exploitative, but he was taking advantage of these students' naivete, even though he was their age initially.
Right. Right.
Is that he came prepared with the arguments, and they were just there to kind of emote and yell and be weird. A lot of them, not all of them, and like it's obviously clipped, and it's not just these he was doing this like what is it, that circle. He did all
Oh,
sorts of these like
30 on one or that. That's
yeah, he did
yeah.
all sorts of things like that.
Yes.
He was obviously really good at it. Obviously, he's not like a neurotic person. He, accepts, you know what I'm saying? Like, he doesn't care being stared at. He doesn't care being the center of the attention. He doesn't care, like, arguing with a whole crowd. That's a certain personality. Honestly, I'm a little bit like that. I'm I'm not as winsome as Charlie Kirk. You know, that's
Right.
what I will say.
Yeah.
So when people say like, "Oh, well, he was a pugilist," like I've seen people say that. I'm like, have you watched the way he reacts to like, especially when he's being punched from like the left, from like, a woman that's like, some like pierced, tatted woman, and she's like, I've had like 6 abortions. Like, what do you think of that?
Right.
And
Right.
he's not like he does. His first reaction isn't, "You're satanic and you're going to go to hell." Like he doesn't do that. He's just like, well, um, he would say something like, this is literally, I think, what he would say. He's like, I believe in Jesus Christ. I
Right.
believe he, comes to redeem all of us, and he can save you.
Right.
And like I want you to find him. He would say things like that to people that would like kind of be like, not kind of, they would be aggressive. They'd be
Yes.
like,
Right.
or like
Yeah.
like I'm gay and like blah blah blah. And he's just like, well, that's you. And he would also have to do, and this is like kind of a bit of a fusionist thing for those of you who watched our previous podcast. Uh, it's like he did have like very conservative personal values, and he was generally more socially conservative, obviously. But he would do things like make a distinction about the fact that like, look, so the Groypers would attack him for like, why do you allow gays in the conservative
Right.
movement? He's like, look, I don't agree with homosexuality. I'm a Christian. This is what I believe.
Yeah.
But the reality is, there is like, we're sinners, and sin's gonna happen. Okay, now
Right.
obviously, like murder is a sin, and you don't think that should be legal, but homosexual activity, we can have arguments about that. People said Charlie Kirk was a Christian nationalist, and one thing that I did tweet this out, and I know you've read some Christian nationalist stuff. I've
Hmm.
read a little bit of it, but it's just like I don't really know. Like sometimes I like thought experiments, but like, look, this is ridiculous. Like you're talking about like,
Right.
removing the vote from like Catholics.
Yeah.
It's just like
Yeah.
this is LARPing. It's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And Charlie Kirk was not of that type, is what
No,
you're
no,
saying.
no, no. So I said like you could do lowercase Christian nationalist, where it's like, okay, like you're a nationalist and you're a Christian, and you think
Right.
Christianity should like guide our governance and our culture,
Yes.
which
Right.
is like, frankly, a pretty mainstream view across much of American life in various ways, depending on how you take it. And then there's like uppercase Christian nationalism, which is basically most of these uppercase Christian nationalists come out of Reformed Christianity, and they are definitely dominionist or theonomist, tinge, and they
Right.
believe that the Bible, the biblically based governance, is a thing, and like they would be like, okay, like we should consider stoning for disobedient children and weird things like that. Like that's the extreme case, but I mean, I think like some of the uppercase Christian nationalists, like they're like, yes, like non-Christians are not going to be citizens. We should try to encourage all the Jews to move to Israel because we don't want Jews in our state, like these sorts of things.
Right.
Or like kind of like some Muslims, some fundamentalist Muslims are like, well, slavery should be, maybe slavery is not like practical today, but we shouldn't say that it's immoral because it's in the Bible. They say weird things like that. Charlie Kirk is not like that. Charlie Kirk was not that Christian, that type of Christian nationalist. And so when people use terms like misogynistic, homophobic, racist, Christian nationalist, I do have to say that it's a little bit complicated because, yeah, by your liberal definition, sometimes
I
he
can
was
never tell. Yeah. It's
yeah,
hard to
he
say.
was.
It's like, well,
He was racist and misogynistic, but he wasn't like a repeal the 19th Amendment guy. Like there are literally people in the far right conservative movement who want to, have women not have the vote. He was never one of those guys.
right.
In many ways, he was a moderate and normie within the conservative movement.
Yeah.
not necessarily in society as a whole, but within the conservative movement. And so it's like a subtle thing to say that because people are like, how could this guy be moderate? Now, I've been talking for a while. I will say the last thing is you're bringing up the affirmative action and black women and all that. That was within the context of a very specific debate. He was being provocative and he was being a debate bro. Where he, like there are some black women, for example, or like black people, black women in this case, it was black women. They were saying, "I wouldn't be here for affirmative action." They say things like that. Well, if
Right.
you say things like that, are you saying that you're just like on your own merits? You couldn't be here?
I mean,
That's a
right.
debating point, you
Yes,
know?
yes. And it's sort of, well, I mean, not to get into it too much, but it's sort of the logic of affirmative action is like, you're saying, like, why do you have affirmative action instead of just a merit-based thing? You're assuming that people would not get in under the pure merit-based thing,
Yeah.
or need to get in. And
It's a whole discussion we can have,
right,
and
yes,
you're not racist for having that discussion.
right,
Or like with homosexuality, Charlie Kirk, I'm sure I don't know for a fact because I haven't like looked, but he probably opposed gay marriage.
yeah,
Okay,
yes, yeah,
which is a minority position in American society, but it's a minority position of like 30% or 40%, not like 3 or 4%. So if you say he's homophobic because of that, you're saying like, well, probably the majority. It is, I think, 55-60% of Republicans are still opposed to gay marriage. Something like that.
something like that.
And so, again, like when you're using language like this, you're misleading people, you're confusing people, you're muddying the waters. Like, I think like, he has such a huge oeuvre because of like how much content he put out there. He's a content creator, you know.
Right.
Um, and I know a little bit about this. Like I put like a lot of text out there. You can like, people have misrepresented me, and so I think like we owe it to him not to misrepresent him, and we don't need to like everything's out there.
Right.
It's not like he was a mystery, you know.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, yeah, the way I would put it is, whether I guess I would put it a couple ways. One is for the most part, his views were the same as the views of your conservative uncle, let's say, right? Who like your Trump supporting uncle, whoever it is. I mean, not 100%, I'm sure, like, because there's variation in individuals, but in general, and so if you think that if your definition of racism, like if you view you're against affirmative action, then you're a racist. If you view you're against abortion, then you're a misogynist. Then okay, in that sense, yes. But I personally don't agree with that as a definition. And I think more importantly, most people, I think, if they see those terms, what they really are getting at is, he's a hater, right? He's doing,
Yeah.
and I don't get that sense from him. I don't think that's true. I think one thing, a lot of people, including people who are convinced that Charlie Kirk was a hateful bigot or whatever, they did not really seem to know that much even about what he did believe. So, for example, there were a couple famous incidents. I think both Stephen King, the horror writer, and then Alistair Campbell, who is a political advisor to Tony Blair back in the day, they both ended up having to apologize because they had tweeted or stated something about how Charlie Kirk wanted to stone gay people to death, right? Which, of course, is not true, and I think there was some clip where someone else was like arguing with him about the Bible, and it came up, and he said, "No, we don't, we want to do that." But like that, I think I think that is sort of an indicative of maybe kind of like a failure of theory of mind that happens a lot. I think it probably happens more on the left, I would say, where to me, like if I heard somebody, if I saw a clip of somebody who was not just like a raving lunatic on the street, but was someone with like a big platform and other stuff, and someone says, well, they want to stone gay people to death. It's like, is that really? That doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Like there's something in your head should be like, you need to look into that more because it seems like probably that's being misrepresented somehow, which of course it was. But I guess for a lot of people, when they're thinking about politics, they turn that part of their brain off if it ever existed.
Well,
Um,
so misrepresented. There's only so much. There were so many things that were being misrepresented, and like I didn't want to like on social media and stuff. Like I wasn't gonna like. There's so many. It's like so many fires to put out, so many
yes,
holes in the
right,
dam, right?
right,
There's some things you can focus on. I did like keep pushing back over and over again to this idea that he said, black women, were like incapable or whatever as a generality, because that's a really short clip and it's quite clear in the context. And it was like people would say that that's what he said, and then like they would include the clip, and I'm like, "Did you watch the clip?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's what he said." And I'm just like, "Okay, I can't convince you, but it's like
yeah, yeah. We had
you saw the exact same thing. You would just refuse because you're basically like, well, he must mean this in the
right,
generality if he said this in the context of this debate."
right,
But like
right.
you don't know that he did. You're inferring that, and obviously like her name is it's not Karen, it's Karen Ataya. So as we're recording this, the Washington Post journalist
Yeah,
lost her job because she tweeted, uh, I think it was on Blue Sky,
it was on Blue Sky. Yeah,
it was on Blue Sky that like he said that as a quote, which is not a literal quote. And you're a journalist at the Washington Post. You're an editor at the. She's an editor, I think, and she can't do that. So also apparently when she got fired, like they talked about all the other things she had said on Blue Sky recently. That
yeah.
was kind of condoning what was going on, and I do have to say, like, this is definitely another sign of the vibe shift because this was used to be allowed. Like, you could say whatever,
Oh,
uh,
totally. Yeah,
and like it's almost like it seemed like pretextual, like they were just like done with her and done with the drama because this particular journalist, was retweeting October 7th, like
right.
was retweeting like, what do you think it was vibe? She retweeted that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Not like a, you know, I don't know, not a big fan of her. But my point there is like I felt like I had to like speak up there because like it's just really obvious, it's really clear, and like if you let those things go, they will just become the lore, And I've seen it with myself, with other people, where it's like the most frustrating thing is you find out there's a rumor or someone said something about you and it's not true, and you're just like you don't know how to react. So if you say like, "Oh, Razib, like you have politically incorrect views," like this is a real example,
right,
politically incorrect views about like race, I know exactly how I'm going to react and how I'm going to explain myself.
right.
But when people have said like, "Oh, well, you're sexist," I'm like, "Oh, maybe I am," but like, I never talk about that.
Yeah,
It's just
right,
like,
right,
what do you even mean? Like, I haven't talked. I'm not like a I was never a manosphere person.
right.
And in fact, I'm still not a manosphere person. So that was weird. Or like, you're so transphobic, and I'm like, I mean, I don't talk about that. It's not. It's not. It's not a
Yeah,
big interest of mine. It's not a big focus. So you're just tacking things on, and it's just
right.
like really frustrating. Now, obviously, Charlie can't defend himself, but his
Yes.
ex wife, his widow is still there. His kids are going to grow up, and I just feel like people should defend, or people should correct the record, because if you don't correct the record will be made for you. You
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is something that I find very frustrating. There's kind of two things. One is just like at the very least, I think especially if you're a journalist, you should strive uh, to the utmost. Just first be accurate. If you think that a person said X and he meant Y, then okay, you can say that, but don't say that. Don't insist that he said Y, right? And, especially if you're putting things in quotation marks or whatever. And then when people point out, no, he didn't say Y, he said X, you know, loudly insist that no, he said Y. I mean that I'm not a journalist. Maybe I don't understand the journalism code or whatever, but it seems like that sort of thing should be pretty important. Um,
Yeah.
I'm also very frustrated. Um, yeah, many people, I think they have a kind of amorphous sense that this person is bad. He said these bad things without even, but they don't know the details, let alone like having examined, what was this in context or whatever. I know we mentioned Blake, uh,
As
Charlie's
I like to call him, Balake, but
Blake. Yes, yes. You know, he there was a incident. years ago now where he was canceled. He lost his job. Um, and I remember being in a conversation with someone on Clubhouse about this, and he said, "Oh, Blake, he was fired because he made bad comments or whatever." And I said, "Well, like, what did he say? Like, what was bad?" Because I don't know what he said, but it must have been bad because Fox fired him, right? So, I mean, this is a it's very frustrating because it's like you're to try and fight back against this. It's like you're punching jelly or something that's just
Yeah,
amorphous. You can't even have something specific that you can address. However, I will say, I think overall, despite this, I think this um, one of the positive elements of this, to the extent that, I mean, yes, you can have positives that come out of any tragedy, right? And doesn't make it any less of a tragedy, but it does. I have been kind of heartened uh, the extent to which you know most people don't seem to be buying into this, or they seem to be, like um, at a Coldplay concert. Chris Martin was, at one point he's saying, well, let's just send out love to all sorts of people. And he mentioned like Ukraine and, different conflicts, but he also said, send out love to the family of Charlie Kirk, right? Or you have, tributes and other things in NFL stadiums, other things like this, which I don't, prior to, like, I don't think that all these people, some of them maybe were Charlie Kirk super fans, but I don't think the Coldplay band were watching the Charlie Kirk show, So in some way, he's become like even more accepted, because of his death. I hope, perhaps. I think that's generally good, but I also think maybe uh, that could serve as like a disincentive to future attackers to know that, look, if you don't like somebody's ideas, leave aside the moral aspect that you shouldn't shoot them for it. But actually, if shooting them is just going to make their ideas, you know, more mainstream, right? Then maybe that will make these people think twice before they do it. Probably
probably
not,
not.
because there's,
Probably not.
when you're
Well, okay, so we have on this note we're going to talk about these people, like what we know. But I
yeah,
do want to talk a little about Charlie Kirk and his evolution because I kind of like viewed him as like a normie con, boomer con, whatever, just like a generic basic bitch conservative, mainstream. Like he was pro Trump in 2016, but like it was basically like, okay, like I support Trump, but I don't think he was that different on his policies from Mitt Romney. You know,
Mhm.
because he was going to college campuses and talking to libs. He was talking to liberals,
Right.
and so it's like there wasn't like the contrast. I think that the Groyper Wars made him aware more, or like more self-conscious about what his positioning on the right was. And so we've been talking about him for a long time, so I don't want to like talk about the whole, and like I don't know the whole arc. I mean, again, like he's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger,
Yeah.
and but recently he's been taking more nuanced positions on Israel, and like I think it was like a couple of years ago when there was like an Israeli, like they said it was a mistake, so and I'll take it at their word. They bombed, I think, the church that actually Justin Amash's family was staying at. He did lose some family members. A Catholic church in Gaza,
Yeah.
and Charlie Kirk was like, "Whoa, hold up here! Like, what's going on with you?
Right.
Bombing churches? Which that got him some blowback, and he didn't go full Tucker. Obviously, he didn't go to full Tucker.
Right. Right.
We know
It
this
didn't go heavy
probably.
Tucker, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, he was trying to navigate a position between like kind of like where I think he would have been in 2016 in his like classic conservative phase of like, okay, like just Israel or the highway. Like there's no daylight between America and Israel. I think he was expressing a more nuanced view recently, and that was getting him. some blowback. Like John Harris on the commentary podcast said, he had some snarky comment about Charlie Kirk. Uh, because Charlie said something that was insufficiently supportive of Israel. And now the reality is on the Israel issue in the traditional boomer Republican Party as it became basically after George H.W. Bush left the scene because George H.W. Bush was an Israel skeptic comparatively, right?
Right, right.
um, is really really pro-Israel, and like taking it down a notch uh, is was just like heresy. The reality is, there's people like Nick Fuentes, obviously on the far right, the Groypers, who are anti-Israel because they don't like Jews, they're anti-Zionist. But there's people like Tucker, who I don't think he's anti-Semitic. He is not a big fan of what Israel's doing. There's other this Dave Smith person. I don't really know him too well, to be honest. He seems like a new figure, a MAGA libertarian, but he's against the. A lot of the podcast bros that supported Trump are against, the Gaza invasion and what's going on,
Right.
so there's some dispute. It's still majority support Israel, especially the older cohorts. But among the youth, there is some
Yes.
some split. And we talked about during the NatCon episode that at the NatCon conference, one of my friends said, "Yeah, there's definitely a split among the youth in the pro or anti."
Right.
And we have friends who are, have said that they don't know any young people or people younger than 35 who are super hardcore boomer con Israel. Okay, so that's happening, and Charlie was tracking that, and he was kind of expressing, I think, the closest to a consensus, which is we still support Israel, but look, we're not going to be without any judgment, criticism. We're going to be rational about this and see what's going on. And
Hmm.
if we think Israel is overstepping, we will bring it to their attention, right? And so
Right.
that's where he was on that. On immigration, he went from being like a pretty normie, not necessarily open borders, but the standard Republican view, which is immigrants are great, to
Yeah.
he seems to be leaning towards just a pause, just national immigration moratorium. He tweeted out something about Indian immigrants recently, which is very in keeping with certain trends on the right.
Yeah.
So he was creating I think the landscape, creating kind of the temperature, but he's also following the temperature, and
Right.
that can be dangerous and it can be difficult. He was pretty good at it. He had good relations with all the different people. He was getting a lot of blowback because TPUSA, which is kind of a big catch-all conference, still had it had Tucker Carlson headlining it,
Right.
and they
Right.
wanted to remove Tucker because Tucker's become very very anti. Tucker has become a restrainer. He's become an American conservative, and just very anti-interventionist. And Charlie still kept him. So and TPUSA has traditionally had a lot of different members who have expressed, shall we say, suspect views about Israel and the Jews. Um,
Yeah.
I'm not talking even
It is
talking about
still yeah.
I'm not even talking about Candace because Candace is like a big deal, but there were just all sorts of random TPUSA members that would
Sure.
kind
Sure.
of get caught saying anti-Semitic things. It's a big conference, and there's a lot of diversity of views and types of people. I think Ashley St. Clair had some association with TPUSA for a while. I don't know what she did, but
Yeah.
she's a very non-traditional conservative, shall we say?
Yeah.
The whole influencer world is a little different. So I wanted to say here that he's a 31-year-old man when he died, when he was killed.
Yeah.
Very different than the 18-year-old he was all those years ago. I think the main through line is he reflected and helped shaped the mainstream of the Conservative Party. The last thing I'll say before I let you go, if you want to talk about Charlie Moore, is had many, many personal relationships. J.D. Vance was a pallbearer. He was on the Charlie Kirk show recently,
Yeah.
subbing for Charlie Kirk. Usha, his wife, was consoling Erica Vance or Erica Kirk. Um, and so he was very close to a lot of powerful figures in politics. Bill Ackman was reaching out to him about Israel apparently. So his passing hit many powerful people very personally.
Right.
With someone they knew, someone that texted them and talked to them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
so
and I think that is true. Um, he had personal relationships with a lot of people. I also think, and maybe especially early, like at the very beginning, it's there's something a little different about his murder in this sense that typically when we've had political violence in the United States, it's typically has either involved attacks on elected officials, or depending on how you want to count it, like just like someone shoots up a church or a synagogue or something like that, right? Just like targets of opportunity. And Charlie Kirk was not like that. He wasn't a politician, but he was involved in like he was a pundit. And so if you are, and I've talked to many people about this, if you are yourself a conservative pundit, someone who maybe does go speak at campuses, right? If you're a journalist, if you have a podcast, right, this is going to hit closer to home because of that, because you can't help thinking, they want to, and especially given that I think you have to say, Charlie, his views were well within the mainstream of just like the modern conservative movement. You like if you are any sort of conservative person with any sort of profile, you have to think, well, that could have been me, or like whoever shot him would probably want to shoot me if in the right circumstance. And I know lots of people who are like, well, now we got to look at private security, or we got to do other stuff, or trying to calm their families down because they're going to speak at some campus event or whatever. So that also, I think, has had an impact. And I think you could even see that to some extent with some of the more thoughtful pundits on the left, because you have to realize that what a left-wing nut can do, a right-wing nut can also do.
Yeah.
That's a bad scene. So I kind of think it has a greater significance. I mean, it's been quite a while. There have been some successful incidents of political violence, but many of the big ones that we can think of in recent years have not been successful, right? Like Trump he was shot, but he was not killed. Paul Pelosi was attacked, but he survived. The shooting in 2017 of the like congressional, House Republican, Steve Scalise was shot, but he survived. There was, the two Minnesota legislators this summer were killed, right? So I'm not saying that never happens, but I don't want to diminish that attack at all, but it is the case that a Minnesota state legislature doesn't have the national profile of a presidential candidate or the husband of the Speaker of the House. So I think we've been kind of lucky that some of these attacks have not succeeded, and really you have to go back, I think, to the 60s to find an era in which you have the most obvious parallels of just high profile people being down, right? And that's not something that I think most people do not want to go back to that, regardless of what they thought about Charlie Kirk's politics or where they are in the political spectrum.
Okay. I mean, people have said that this Charlie Kirk might have become president, and he's community college dropout, whatever. But I think after Donald Trump kind of broke the mold, I think yes, it's quite plausible that Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, it's possible. And there are like, I don't know, Mark's like it's a different circumstance, but Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of college, right? Bill Gates dropped out of college. Like some people drop out of college because they can't hack it. Other people, it's because they got something else going on. And I mean, when you're 20 and you like are heading a nationwide political organization or whatever, like I could understand, maybe yeah, it's a somewhat different circumstance. I would say it's a special circumstance, so I don't think it doesn't have the same signal that it might have in other realms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we're talking about Charlie a lot. We were going to talk about. We should talk a little bit about the killer,
Yes.
and now singular, and then get to Pam Bondi. So let's talk
Okay.
real quickly. Why don't you talk about what we know and how is this being portrayed as left versus right, and
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the whole
So,
thing.
uh, um, and I should say, we're recording this on Tuesday. I don't know exactly when this.
Afternoon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like developments continue to happen. So at this point, there's been some chatter of like, could he have had accomplices or whatever. At this point, there does not seem to be anything definitive on that or whatnot. But you know, uh, I think what we do know from reporting from the investigation is he was a he was a kid. He grew up in a conservative Mormon family. He went off to school. He dropped out after a semester. At some point in his life, he seems to have moved left. Exactly what that means has been left a little vague, but friends, family, other people have said that, oh yeah, he was a left to center kind of guy. He also, and that I think is borne out on the shell casings, are a number were written a number of like phrases and other things which uh, were video game references, but they were video game references that also related to like anti-fascism or whatever, So I think one of them was, "Hey fascist, catch this" or something, reference to Bella Ciao, anti-fascist Italian song, both of which also feature in video games. Okay. Anyway, and the other big piece of the puzzle is he was apparently uh, dating a man who is transitioning to be a woman. They were roommates, and so without knowing things for sure, definitively, it does seem like that probably played a role in his motivation. Because
So as you're speaking, New York Times is updated with some text from the indictment. Some text, I think, with his partner. I'll say that.
yeah, yeah,
And he said, so I'll just like read that part. So,
okay,
a roommate, why? Robinson, why did I do it? Roommate, yeah. Robinson, I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. If I am able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence, blah, blah, blah. How long have you been planning this? Robinson, a bit over a week. He's not like super interested in explaining. He's basically at this point texting about how he's going to get away, retrieve the
right,
rifle, and other things like that.
yeah,
And then he says the fucking messages are mostly a big meme. If I see, quote, notices bulge UWU on Fox News, I might have a stroke, all right. So also enjoying it a little bit, it seems like that, like in
yes,
terms of like the trolling. But yeah, so he was motivated because, I mean, he shot. I mean, Charlie Kirk was shot as he was talking about trans
correct.
shooters.
And it's
The
it's
whole thing is surreal.
it's interesting whether that was uh, intentional. Did he wait until the transition came up, or is it just a coincidence? I don't know. Maybe that will come out or not. But so that seems fairly clear. Uh, Weirdly, as more evidence has come in about his motives and political background and social background, whatever. Uh, Parallel to that, there seems to be a growing belief on the left that actually he was a conservative Republican who shot Shirley Kirk.
Or a Groiper. Or a Groiper.
Right.
It was a far right.
Yeah, right. Who shot Kirk for those reasons. And I mean, this is very aggravating. I personally, I didn't say anything publicly for the first, like when the shooting happened. My thought was, and I said this, my thought was, okay, it's probably someone who is upset about the trans issue, some kind of left-wing person, but it's possible it could be a Groiper, right? Like I didn't dismiss that as a possibility, and so you wait and see. So it's not a priori crazy, they're like
also like with the Groipers, they could have trans partners.
Yeah, right. That's possible, and it's also, it's also possible. Sometimes people have, sometimes political figures are shot for left-wing political reasons, sometimes for right-wing political reasons. A lot of times, it's the person is just kind of nuts, or whatever. So I thought that was like maybe he's just some sort of schizo. I mean, the I guess about a month ago now, a trans person shot up a Catholic school, and they also had written messages on their guns, but the messages were kind of all over the place, So there was like anti-Christian stuff, there was like Free Palestine, there was kill Donald Trump, or So it really seemed in that case that person is just kind of crazy. So like that happens a lot, so any of those are possible, but as the evidence comes out, I do believe that you do need to accept that, and it's not just a left-wing thing. I know there are cases. I mean, the person who shot the two Democrat legislators in Minnesota back in June, appears to be a crazy person. He was also a conservative Republican and may or may not have been. It's unclear if he was motivated by the issue of abortion. He seemed to have had a kill list that included a lot of abortion people, but he also said like crazy stuff about how Tim Walz ordered him to do it or whatever. But it is the case that if you I talked to a lot of Republican conservative people, they're convinced, oh, that guy was actually a leftist, because Tim Walz appointed him to some nonpartisan board or whatever. So that makes him So I get the impulse, right? I mean, with Paul Pelosi, for a while, people were also saying, well, maybe it's not a political thing. Maybe it was, some sort of weird personal thing. I get the impulse. It's not great, but it's still aggravating. And it's like, you should just accept that, reality is as it seems to be, right?
Yeah. The boring answer is usually the right answer. Yeah, I mean, it seems like we are converging on a certain like profile of the person and what their motivations were. I will say that, people always say it's like was it like the horseshoe theory, the left, right? I think that's partly it's generational, but partly the memes do go from the left to the right in certain weird ways, and like the edginess transcends the left and the right. And so I think it's confusing a lot of people, especially a lot of older people. Also, I know that like like TRS, The Right Stuff, which started out as like a libertarian podcast in 2014 and eventually became a neo-Nazi podcast by 2016 and is kind of infamous. But they have complained that a lot of dirtbag leftists have been kind of imitating their style.
Right.
But the thing is, there's nobody is going to be like, oh, like you're imitating a Nazi podcast, and they're not going to say that they were you know what I'm saying?
Right, yeah.
So it's like everyone is kind of going to like. So I think the Chapo Trap House is the one that was the biggest one, and that accusation has been made, and a lot of people say it seems pretty clear the Chapo people were listening to TRS and like picked up some just like kind of like habits of how to like engage their user base, kind of by being like trolls and assholes and stuff like that.
Right.
And but like they never they're never going to get held to account for that because nobody is going to be like, these Nazis deserve credit. you know? It's just kind of a weird thing. But that's I think my point there is like I think it'd be a little confusing for normies, for normal people to figure out the political valence because especially the Zoomer language is also transcends politics and just you know I think he used like one of the Pepe or squatting Slav memes, which I think is more right coded, but not necessarily. Okay. Tyler Robinson, I think it's just as possible that he could have become a griper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, there's a kind of type of person who is attracted to or susceptible to like extreme ideologies, and it can be kind of maybe a coin flip about whether that ends up being an extreme right ideology or extreme left ideology. Sometimes people flip back and forth.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
some people
Like
are, yeah. And I don't
there's
know,
a
I don't know enough about his case to really say, but I will say, I mean, just in general, people like a lot of people, like people's temperament and character, in many times. I've known people who have gone through radical political transformations, right? And the temperament and character doesn't change; it stays the same, So if they were like nice and thoughtful, if they were a nice and thoughtful leftist, they'll become a nice and thoughtful conservative. If they were, an asshole, they'll still be an asshole, right? If Destiny were to become like a huge MAGA guy, he would still be an enormous jerk. That's my prediction.
Exactly. Yeah. No. You're right. You're right. I think
Yeah.
I think that's true. That is a true thing. Excuse me. We've been talking for a while, so we should move on to America's sweetheart, Pam Bondi.
Yes.
What is this going on here? And it's not just Pam. As we're recording, Trump has said some garbled things about hate speech. I don't know if you saw, but yeah. I don't know. It's just weird. So basically, Pam Bondi is like hate speech, not free. It's just, okay. It's just like liberal talking points from 2018.
Right. Right.
And like I used to make fun of Howard Dean because he said that too. And actually, I think Tim Walz said that during the debate. And Tim Walz is kind of dumb, so it makes sense.
Yes.
That he would just kind of. So this is just like a liberal meme. Yeah, actually, yes, he did say that. He said like does it protect hate speech? Yeah, you dumbass, you fucking retard. It's beyond the paywall, so I can say what I think. Like you fucking moron,
Right. Yeah.
you fucking retard. Like yeah, no shit. It's called the First Amendment, asshole. Sorry.
No problem.
Like it just pisses me off because it's just like it's just such a dumb argument.
Yeah.
Like what the hell is hate speech? I fucking hate you. Like should that be like banned?
Right. Yeah. Hate speech is speech you hate. Yeah. I mean, so this is I